Okay, so far we've looked at our model as for the economy, it's a closed economy, and it's also, we're only looking at the private sector. So that's why we only have, for aggregate expenditure so far, we only have consumption and investment, which means that we don't have a public sector, we don't have a government sector, and we don't have we're not trading. We're not opening our economy to the world. So what we're going to do in this video, in video 7, is we're going to add a public sector and we're going to add a net export section. And it turns out that it's actually fairly easy to do. We're going to make two really big assumptions. The first assumption, is that government spending is independent of the level of GDP. So it actually is not affected by that at all. Okay, government spending is not affected by the level of GDP. Level of GDP could be very low and government spending could be high and vice versa. Government spending will only be affected by what the government decides to do. It's a decision the government takes, and the government will decide how much money to spend in the economy. So it's simply a decision the government takes. 2, we're also going to assume that net export, which is a greater assumption, it's an even grosser assumption, if you will, net export is also independent of the level of GDP. Now, of course, this is not true in reality, but we are going to simply assume that to make our model a little bit simpler. Okay, so let's see visually what that means. On the y-axis, I'm going to have government spending. I'm going to isolate each variable now. And on the x-axis, I have GDP, or otherwise known as disposable income, because they're equal, remember? And basically what this says is that once the government decides how much money they want to infiltrate into the economy, let's say $500 billion or something like that, okay? Then, again, this is in dollars, right? And this is also in dollars, right? But let's say it's $500 billion. Well, that will be our value, and it will remain constant, okay? No matter how big the GDP is. And again, just to simplify things a bit, so this is our G, okay? Turns out that we're going to do the same thing for net export. Now, in the United States, net export is almost, unfortunately, at least right now, it's almost always negative for us. And so we need to take that into account. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to go from -10 to 10. So, you know, we're going to have net export in billions of dollars. Okay, billions of dollars. And, you know, again, GDP or disposable income. Okay, so for us, I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but it's easily, we easily have a trade deficit of, I believe, at least 600 billion, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm just throwing out a number arbitrarily, but you know, just for the sake of the example, you get the point. So it'll be a negative number, right? Or maybe it'll be this negative, right? Or it could be positive for a country like China, right? But for us, it's going to be negative, okay? So this is our xn, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to put those two inside of our model, okay? And it's very simple because really all we're adding is just a constant, right, to c plus I. So what we're going to look at is c plus I plus g plus x, right, plus government plus net export plus xn. Okay, so if we want to look at the c plus I plus g line, the c plus I plus g line will clearly look something like that, right? We're assuming that the government is spending money in our economy, and usually they do, right? Most years they do. So c plus I. And again, the difference is the amount that the government's spending. Okay. Now c plus I plus g plus x, and in the United States will actually be a line that's slightly lower than this, because again, nowadays our net exports, are smaller, are negative. That's what I'm trying to say. So this will be our. Let me just move this here. This might be our final line. So I'll do it in. I'll draw it in red, perhaps. Actually, this will be our final line. Okay. So let me take all the other ones out of here. Okay. And what I want you to notice is the final. The equilibrium that we have once we're done with our model, which basically we're almost there. The equilibrium is given by this point, right? Where aggregate expenditure is equal to disposable income. Okay, this is where our economy is going to be at equilibrium. Remember, there is no incentive for businesses to shift production, to increase, to increase their production or to decrease their production, because there's no unplanned investment and we are in equilibrium. Okay. People buy everything. People, other businesses, the government, and then foreigners buy exactly the amount that firms produce in this case, right? So people, consumption, other businesses, our government, and then foreigners buy exactly the amount, the output, the total output that firms are producing in our economy. Okay, so that's why we're in equilibrium there. Okay, the next thing you need to know is that if we're in equilibrium in this model, all we know is that this is our actual GDP, right? Right here we have our actual GDP. But we don't know that this actual GDP is our potential GDP. So for example, nowadays we have about, 5% unemployment? 5% cyclical unemployment, sorry. Because we have 8.5% unemployment and about 3.5% is natural rate of unemployment. So we have 5.5% cyclical. So we know from Hawkins' law that we have really, it's almost like a 10% GDP gap between our actual and potential GDP. And so in this case, even though our actual GDP is here, potential GDP actually might be here. Okay, closer to here. Okay, or maybe slightly lower because we're only looking at 10% difference, so might be here. Okay. So here's our actual GDP. Here's our potential GDP. This is the case of a recession, right? Because our potential GDP is higher than the actual. We want to somehow get to potential GDP. So what we're really concerned about here is something called a recessionary gap. The recessionary gap is this vertical distance, and I'll show this, I'll make this in green. Okay. It's this vertical distance. Okay, and let me make it a little bit bigger. Actually, maybe I'm not able to. Okay, so it's this green distance, right? And basically what this green distance indicate is how deficient aggregate expenditure is at this point and how much it needs to go up by in order for us to achieve our potential GDP level. Because after all, if our C plus I plus G plus X line goes up by this much, right? Let me just take this out real quick. If it goes up by this much, then we're going to be at potential GDP, but it's not, right? It's not there yet. So because it's still here, this green distance shows you how deficient spending is in order for us to be at this new equilibrium where we would actually reach our potential GDP.